What a great weekend. What a great race. It was filled with a lot of action, a lot of big moments, and we're going to discuss them all today on the Canadian Grand Prix recap. Welcome back to Grandstand Therapy. I am Lori. So, with the sprint weekend, there is so much to unfold. You have, like, between Thursday and Sunday, action packed. So, I did make a bunch of notes because there's just too much to cover. So, apologize if I have to look down at my notes. So let's start out with the weekend. So going into the Grand Prix, they had made some additional regulation changes to drop it to 6 megajoules for harvesting, and that definitely is the lowest we've had yet. And it was definitely noticeable because we did not have we weren't talking about a bunch of super clipping this time in qualifying. And even during the race, I felt like the drivers were able to go way more flat out. So we did have some additional upgrades brought to this Grand Prix. We already knew going in that Mercedes was going to be bringing it. They did bring, I think, about eight, and it sounded like a lot of it had to do with the rear to front wing and the aerodynamics of it all. Also, we had Red Bull bring a few additional upgrades. And Alpine, while they did start with their upgrades in Miami on Gasly's car, they brought it to both cars for this Canadian Grand Prix. So that kind of was the highlights. McLaren also was going to bring their additional upgrades this weekend. They did bring some in Miami as well, and they felt like they were going to complete some this weekend. I don't feel like this is the last of the upgrades for any of the cars. Of course, there's going to be additional ones brought as we go along and we hit the European leg. I think Red Bull said they were going to bring some more as they got into that stint. Let's start with Media Day. Media Day on Thursday, Sir Lewis Hamilton was the star of the show. I mean, there were two other drivers in there with him, but you wouldn't have known it. I think he talked 20 minutes of the 30, and they were just the broadcasters and the press were bringing question after question to Lewis, and he was answering them. He was first asked about his retirement rumors. He shut those down real quick. He said, "Look, I love this sport. I love what I do. I am very lucky to be able to do this as my job. And I have a contract, but only that, I'm looking 5 years ahead. So guess we're not losing Lewis, which is fantastic to hear from him. Last year was awful to watch, and this weekend, man, did he have a smile on his face. He also talked about that he had his mom with him, which she hasn't traveled with him in a while, and he was excited for her to be there. She's a great support system. I think it put him in a great headspace, really, to be honest. Another thing that he was asked and he talked a lot about was if he's been in the sim at all practicing this track. And he said, no. I really did not get in the sim. I've had two races where I've gotten in the sim and I've not had great results because it doesn't lead to the track. So I'm going off instincts. That's what's done for me for all these years. And even though we have regulation changes and you don't know what it's going to be track to track, that he just was going to get in the car for practice and see how he felt and make adjustments from there. So that's we'll cover that a little bit more when we get into the race highlights. I've got a few more talking points on that, but I found that to be very interesting. He's still going old school, and I love to hear that. We also had something that came out of Media Day. You had Max Verstappen kind of starting the weekend with he's glad that they'll be making changes for 27 and it's going in a better direction. And if that's the case, he's here to stay. That was good, but that did not continue through the weekend, as we will talk about as we get into some of the talking points for the weekend. So I made some notes. They also added some rear flashing lights for the battery indicator on the back of the cars for the drivers following to be able to know what the car in front of them is doing, which is a great addition. It would flash, I think, green if they were, full battery kind of harvesting, and then I think it would go to yellow if they were low, and I think it would be red if they were running. So that was trying to help. So let's get into practice session. So practice session, we only had one this weekend because we were going to have a sprint qualifying following, and then the sprint race, and then the qualifying and the race. So lots to unpack. I kind of see when we have a sprint race, especially during this regulation period, is the sprint race kind of being like a practice session for the race. So in the practice session that we had, unfortunately, it was red flagged. I believe 3 times during the practice session, if I'm not wrong. Liam, he immediately had a red flag because he had a gearbox failure. It was so horrible for Lawson. I felt dreadful for him. Alex, he hit a wall, but it turned out actually being that he hit a groundhog and then went into the wall. So rest in peace, Gary, the groundhog, as I'm sure you've all seen the memes now. Franco, he came out, had to have an engine change, so he was out. Bottas had problems with his car. They were trying to repair it. They did get him out, but he didn't last out there very long. Then there was the last 5 minutes, we had Esteban came out with a red flag because he hit the wall and his front wing came off. So it was an eventful practice session. Lots of people were frustrated because they weren't able to get a whole lot done during that practice session, but either way, we go into sprint qualifying. Sprint qualifying, we did not get Lawson out for the qualifying for the sprint race because it was a hydraulic issue that he had, which is the reason for the failure in practice. And they weren't able to get that fixed in time for him to qualify for the sprint race, which meant that he was going to start last on the sprint qualifying. Um, then we had Alex. Also, his car was not going to be repaired in time because of hitting the groundhog, so he was also going to have to be out of sprint qualifying. So, sprint qualifying, I just made a few notes. I mean, SQ1, Fernando crashed out. Unfortunately, poor Fernando. I thought he was going to do better this weekend, and unfortunately, he brought out a red flag during Q1. And then we also had Perez, Stroll, Gasly, Bottas out. I mean, kind of your typical out of Q1. And then we'll just skip ahead to Q3. We had Russell getting pole, Kimi, Lando, Oscar, Hamilton, Charles, Max, Isaac, Limbad, and Sainz finishing off the top 10. Limbad had a great weekend as well, so I'll bring him up a little bit as we go. So already starting the weekend, Russell coming in saying this was his track. He gets sprint pole. Sprint race. Okay. This sprint race was, oh my gosh. Sprint race starting from the pit lane. We had, of course, Alex, Liam, Behrman, Bottas, and Gasly all starting from the pit lane. So Stroll, he had a suspension change on the starting grid while they were about to start the sprint race. They were trying to fix his car with suspension, and of course, last minute he had to pull out and go back into the garage. There was no there was an investigation launched, but it sounds like no further investigation. He didn't have a penalty. Poor Isaac Hajar, he had an engine problem at lap 5. He went into the garage, but he was able to come out for, I think, a lap 11 of the race. So that gave him some data at least. Hulkenberg ended up with a 10-second penalty for leaving the track and gaining an advantage. Hamilton clipped the wall of champions, but fortunately for him, it was just a clip. And okay, so the battle between Kimi and Russell, holy cow. They were going toe to toe. Kimi was coming on the radio saying this is nasty. If I knew we were going to go racing like this, would have been nice to know in front. At some point, then Dad Toto had to come on the radio and tell them, you guys need to cool it. Kimmy kept saying, just moaning and moaning about George cutting him off. And Toto had to say, look, we don't have these discussions on the radio. This is meant for internal, and you need to stop moaning. I was like, woo, man. So they went toe to toe for quite some time. And in the end, Russell won the sprint race. Kimmy came in P2. I'm sorry, Lando got in front of Kimmy. apologize, Lando. Lando was able to get in the mix of them two after the battles, and he was able to pull off P2 and Kimmy P3. Otherwise, we had Oscar at 4, Charles at 5, Hamilton at 6, Max at 7, and Limbad rounding off the final point. Good job. I was very proud of Limbad. All right, we had to have Fernando, of course, retired during that, and anyway, that was kind of the beef of it all. All right, so now we're gonna get into the hardest stuff. So let's just talk about the race. Let's get into the race highlights. So let's start. Let's start with how bad McLaren read this weather situation. I mean, how did they get it so wrong? So, McLaren, they've got the biggest shot of probably all the top four teams to go toe to toe with Mercedes in this battle for the championship. They really do. And after the warm up lap on the grid to come to the starting grid, we realized that the top four teams are all on soft tires, and McLaren rolls up with intermediate tires. I mean, it had been raining, but it had stopped. It was damp, but not damp enough. And Oscar realized that when he did his formation lap. He came on the radio and said, "We made a wrong choice." But at that point, what are they going to do? They should have. I caught something and I wondered because when they went out to do their kind of what I call a practice lap to roll to the grid, you saw Red Bull Max immediately pull back in and change their tires. I think Red Bull was probably going to think about starting on intermediates too, but they were like, no. And they immediately changed tires before going out for their lap. There were a couple of other teams. I believe Williams also started intermediate. I want to say Hulkenberg did too. But McLaren, this was the start of the show. It's like, what's going on? So we get to the start, and Lando had a good start off the front because he had on a better grip with the intermediates. So he immediately got out in front. But those tires weren't going to hold on for more than 2 laps. I mean, they just weren't. They're going to shred like nothing. So they go in and change immediately tires on lap, I want to say 2. Oscar goes in, gets his tire changes. Lando as well. Lando struggled when he got out of the pit lane and slid a little bit. I think they went on mediums because they were going to try to see where they could do. Of course, it dropped him quite a bit, but at least they would maybe try to catch up before the rest of the field started to pit because everybody else was on soft tires and we don't know how long the soft tires were going to go. You're looking at like 17, 23 laps, something like that. So anyway, he barely almost didn't hit the wall. Lando was just trying to be aggressive, I think, and trying to get out. But got a little bit better handle on the car. But Oscar, on the other hand, Oscar, man, what are you thinking? He was being way too aggressive, diving into corners, and clips Alex Albon, takes Albon out of the race completely. Oscar has to go back in, and he gets a new front wing, new tires, and handed a 10-second penalty, which, that's well deserved. You can't be taking people out. So also, let's see. I mean, that's kind. I mean, how can McLaren get it that wrong? I mean, what were they thinking? Please let me know in your comments. I mean, were you guys as surprised as I was? Let's then get into Mercedes. Mercedes. Okay, so we had our first rival battle of this season. Claws were out. The sprint was crazy between the two of them. We already talked about the radio messages. They did have a meeting afterwards to discuss, look, guys, no contact, got to race, cleanly, got to be respectful to both. They had to have a little meeting about it. But let me tell you, the racing was so fun to watch. I mean, it was electrifying. You felt like you were warped back to Nico Rosberg and Lewis Hamilton days in 2016. They were battling it out, corner after corner after corner, and this went on for multiple laps, just nonstop. Kimmy looked like he's not gonna back down. George was not gonna back down. George was not gonna give him any space. the claws were out. And we don't know. There were supposedly the engineers, after the fact, did come on the radio during the race and tell them they needed to cool it, calm it down. I think Bono was in Kimmy's, you know, ear telling him, you need to race respectfully. I don't think they wanted to tell him to stop racing each other. They did a great job of, there were a couple of moments when Kimmy locked up behind Russell and could have been hit in the back of him, but he didn't. And then you get to lap 31, and Russell's car just completely dies with the uh, battery mechanical failure. Ouch. Not only that, but George Russell, what are you doing? He threw the biggest temper tantrum, threw his headrest across the track, storms out of his car, dives into the window that's there at the track, throws his gloves off. I mean, fuming. Now, he did get a 5,000 euro fine for that, and he did apologize to the stewards. He was called to stewards after the race. But, George, you got to keep your cool. You're not going to win a championship acting as though behavior, which, quite frankly, was kind of a surprise to me because George is the first one to talk about other people when they were fuming, like Max Verstappen, for example, calling him out on his, behavior, and for George to be in the moment. But I guess it just shows you that how much Kimmy's really in his head about this. He really does think that he said afterwards in the press with the press when he was being interviewed that the gods just don't want him to win this championship. So he's definitely got in his head. And man, this is going to be nonstop because let me tell you something. Kimmy's not going away. Kimmy's now 43 points ahead in this championship. So it's game on. I mean, we don't really know. I mean, the question is, all of us have been asking, is Kimmy worthy of getting a world championship over George this year? And I said, not sure yet. He's still maturing, he's still growing, but he's bringing it. And he did have a slump last year during, the European leg, but I think he's a different driver right now. I think he's grown. I think he's learned it, but he's still young and anything can happen. But I think the team is doing a really great job of wrapping their arms around him and keeping him focused, like race by race, instead of like the big picture. Because even in the press conference on Thursday, Kimmy was asked that question a lot of times by the media, and his answer was still just that. I'm focusing on race by race. I'm not even thinking about the championship right now. I think if he can keep that mindset and George is getting in his head about the possibility of losing it, that it's Kimmy's to win, I mean, it's possible. It's definitely possible. So that was here's the thing we're faced with right now is even if we have a dominance that we're expecting with Mercedes 1 and 2, like every race for the matter, I mean, even if it's 1 and 2 finishes, I mean, 5 races it's going to take for George to even make some dent into that. And really, George is really going to need some help. He's going to need some help from some other people getting in there and winning races. McLaren, if Red Bull, Verstappen can get in there, if the Ferraris can get in there, I mean, Russell's going to need some help at this point, or Kimmy's going to have to really lose his confidence. And I just don't really see that happening right now. Look, we've got 17 more races. There's a possibility they may add the other two that we've missed back at the back end of the calendar. I mean, it's a long season ahead, but I think this race put George on notice that Kimmy's not going anywhere. So let's talk about one other thing that I thought was interesting is Tim Rainey with nailing the apex. He said that he had a great interview with Toto also over the weekend, which I think will be coming out next week. But Toto, he was asked, how are you managing the drivers? Like what did he learn anything from Nico and Hamilton days? And he said, yeah, look, we are now listening to the input of the drivers regarding development of the car and regarding the setups, and that's different than we did back then. So that's interesting to know that they're listening to George and Kimmy both on development and setup of the car. and that they're free to race right now. There's no team orders going on. There's no number one. You have to wonder those are going to be a point where one of them's going to get backed. We'll see. Stay tuned for that. So let's get into some of the positive things that we saw from this race weekend, from the race itself. Lewis Hamilton. I mean, he had a fantastic clean pass on Max Verstappen. The two of them going to battle after George was taken out of the race for that left Max Verstappen in P2 at that point. And then Lewis was just like, it was like old days, like 21 days, where Lewis was just hunting down Verstappen. And he was coming on the radio talking about, I need more power, I need more power. He was just pushing the limits. And what I thought was really great was Lewis said after the race that he was having to really calculate like where the energy was being harvested because he knew the Red Bull was faster on straights, like they had more energy to deploy, but he knew he had it more in the corners. So he was calculating every move and every corner to figure out how he could, keep battling Verstappen. And it was so great to watch the two of them go at it. And even more so, like once they battled it out. That was fun to watch, and ended up Verstappen finishing, or sorry, Hamilton getting ahead of Max, finishing P2, and Max finishing P3, and they did their cool down lap around the track. They got a standing ovation from the hairpin. That is how great that was to watch. I mean, it really was to see. And then in the cool down room, listening to Max and Lewis talk was great. I mean, it was like that old rival that they had was squashed, and they were talking about how much fun they had. And then what I love to hear is Max made a comment that, or sorry, Hamilton actually made a comment that it was really nice to be able to follow behind each other a whole lot easier than we ever have before. And Max said, yes, let's hope that continues for the next few years. And that gave me hope. I mean, because I will tell you that want to say it was after the sprint race or after qualifying, Max made another comment about I these cars are just not great, and if there's not changes to 27, like I don't think it's manageable. So I loved hearing that. I want to talk then about Max Verstappen. He ended up, of course, a P3 finished. He enjoyed his battle with Lewis. Uh, he was maybe more competitive this weekend. Not so much in the sprint race, but I felt like in the race he felt like. I mean, look, if the McLarens would have stayed in there, could have been a different story. But either way, you got to capitalize on that. Then let's talk about Leclerc. I'm kind of going in order of the finishing, just because of the storyline, and there's just so much to cover. So Charles Leclerc, P4. Now, I know I said I was going to talk about the positives, and clearly Charles Leclerc had a dreadful weekend. In fact, his comments after qualifying were, "This is the worst weekend of my career." Now, Charles, I don't think it was that bad, but I get your frustration with the car. So, during the race, he came on to his engineer, came on and said, "I think Lewis is at 15 point something." And Charles just with, "Don't talk to me over the radio unless it's something critical." I mean, just he was not having a great weekend. So let's get into P5 Hajar. Oh my gosh, Hajar had a great, solid weekend. He was on par with Max. He was qualifying at close to Max. He was racing close to Max. And you wouldn't know it because, in the race itself, he was in P5 and he was making some mistakes. He got a penalty. He was moving too much over behind Leclerc at one point. That's too dangerous. He ended up with a 10-second penalty. I mean, that was a penalty deserved. You can't do that. He also got a stop and go penalty for not slowing during double yellow flags, but he still managed to solidly plant himself into P5 with the pace. of that car because Franco Colapinto with Alpine was right behind him, and he was still able to keep all those penalties and go in and serve those penalties and still stay above the Alpine. So great drive from him. I really was impressed with him during qualifying. I thought at one point during Q2, I believe it was in qualifying, I mean, he was putting in 112s. I mean, fantastic overall weekend for Hajar. Love to see that. Look to for him to bring more as we go along. Franco Colapinto, P6. Franco Colapinto has had a solid couple of weekends. He did great in Miami. He did great in this in here in Canada. He's planted himself into Q3. He did have the upgrades on his car this weekend where last last race in Miami, Pierre was the only one that got the upgrades. So that was great that he got the upgrades and he capitalized on them and he put himself into P6 and he stayed there. He unfortunately had a lonely race, but he had great results. So, you know what? It's important for him because we don't know what's going to happen with next year with his contract. So he needs to put in great performances, and he certainly did that this weekend and last race. And so I'm hoping he will continue with the great performances because let me tell you something. Alpine, they are definitely the leader of the midfield. And that Haas looked kind of far behind them. We're going to get into Haas. Well, let's just get into Haas now. Going into the weekend, the team principal, well, I should say, there were rumors flying that Esteban might be replaced mid-season due to him not getting along with Oso, the team principal, Haas, and that was squashed. Uh, Team principal was not happy about hearing those things coming out in the media. Completely squashed that. That's not the case. So we'll see. Stay tuned for that developing story, and we'll get into Ollie Bierman. I want to talk about here in a minute. Okay, let's get into Liam Lawson, P7. I mean, great result for him in this race. He did not have any running on Friday at all due to the hydraulic issue. So he was kind of put on the back foot. He had to go with the clean slate into the sprint race because he wasn't able to qualify for the sprint. And he, you know, capitalize on that. And, in the race, again, we weren't expecting to have both the McLarens out and Russell out. So he capitalized on that and he solidified himself at P7. So great performance from him. He had a hard time trying to keep those tire temperatures up. So great for the team and great for Liam Lawson. P8, you have Pierre Gasly. Pierre Gasly, man, he had a roller coaster of a weekend, guys. I mean, he was nowhere on Friday. Sprint qualifying was a nightmare. The team actually had to break curfew and make some significant changes to that car in Parc Ferme, which you're only allowed to have 4 for the season. So they had to really make some significant changes for that car in order to get it in a better window for the race. Clearly worked. Again, Alpine is now solidifying themselves as the top of the midfield, sorry. Williams. Let's talk about Williams. So Carlos got some great points this weekend. I mean, he got some points in Miami. Even though that car's overweight, guys, he's still managing to get some things out of it. He got some great points this weekend. He also started on the intra tires, so for him to claw his way back up to get some points and that was great. Also, while we're talking about Williams, poor Alex. Alex just had a disaster of a weekend, with hitting the groundhog on Friday, left him in a bad place. And then, of course, in the race on Sunday, he gets taken out by Oscar. So, not a great weekend for him. And it's so heartbreaking because Alex is a great driver, guys. I mean, he's really a great driver. And it's just not going his way right now. But I do expect him to get back on top. I think hopefully they'll have a great performance. I don't know if Monaco will be a great place for that, but you never know. Monaco is always who knows what could happen kind of track. So we'll see. But I mean, again, I want to give great props to Williams because Carlos Sainz was able to get those points. And again, the car's overweight. So they're making some strides. So we'll look for some improvements from there. And then to round it off, we'll talk about Ollie Behrman at P10. He had a great solid performance this weekend and got him a point. So that was great there. So I did make some overall notes then for just the overall weekend. Canada, man, just had some great, fantastic racing. It always does produce racing, but they just put on such a great event. It's really a hard track for these drivers, and they talk about how much they love coming here. It's great. It's a challenge. I mean, these corners come thick and fast, and if you hit the corner wrong, you can end up in the wall. Of course, that's why we have the Wall of Champions, named after that. Also, the start of the race. Let's talk about that. So the start of the race was coming fast, and we had the Indy 500 still going on, and because it had been red flagged, there was a massive crash, and we wanted to see who was going to win. And the fumble at the start of the formation lap situation, I mean, I don't know what happened with race control, but the lights did not go off. So Antonelli jumps the start. And I would say that is because Limbad was waving his hands in the back saying, I can't start. A failure, I think it's gearbox failure, is the reason they had to do an abort lap, but it's not. It the starting lights just did not start off. So they had to do not one, not two, but three formation laps. So because of that, like in my household, we paused the race and we finished the Indy 500, which was an electrifying end, and then picked back up on the race. So I don't know what's happening there. Also, don't know what happened with the TV commentating this weekend because it was all over the place too. The cameras were not showing us things. Like we had like at one point, I want to say 4 or 5 um, penalty notations on the board, but yet we weren't seeing any of these things happen. In fact, when Oscar ran into Alex Albon, like we didn't even see that replay until almost the end of the race. Like I'm not quite sure what was going on this weekend, but we weren't seeing replays. We weren't seeing a whole lot of, I mean, we, of course, we're seeing the great action in the front of the field, but then they would pan off of things and show you random stuff in the garage again and not like on track what was happening. So I'm not sure where the failure went with that, but that wasn't great. Also, okay, this podium was the best. The photo said it all. You had 11 world championships on this podium with Kimi Antonelli and your future. It was like past, present, future on that podium. And Lewis Hamilton picking Kimi Antonelli up and putting him on his shoulders. And the look on Max and Hamilton's face, they were both just giddy. I mean, smiley, happy, excited to be there. It was a photo, I believe, of the generational photo that we will continue to see, I believe. That was fantastic to see. And again, um, Max, I, I, I don't know what to feel for him. It's like started with the weekend saying he was excited about the changes for 27, meant that he would be around a while too. I'm not sure if I'm going to be around if they don't change it. I think a lot of that stems from they keep going back and forth with it. Apparently, there are two manufacturers that are not sure if they want to go in the direction of the 60/40 of more fuel in the car. I think it's kind of on the fence about how they're going to do that. Therefore, it's not solid concrete yet, which I think is what's leading Max to being not sure about his decision for the future. But I do think they're going to make the right decision. I do think it will hopefully go to 60/40 or some type of using the ICE engine with sustainable fuel a little bit further direction. I do think that will happen. At least I hope it does happen. And then also, Checo's car in the Cadillac, like randomly the suspension broke like as he was traveling just down the track. He didn't even hit anything. Don't know what happened with that. And then the last thing I want to talk about is F1 Academy. It was fantastic racing this weekend, and Alicia Romanowski, I probably said her name wrong, with Red Bull, she had a 10-second gap lead amongst the field to win that race. That's huge. Like that's the largest gap that they've had yet in F1 Academy. That was amazing to watch. Loved every minute of that. I'm excited because I'm going to get to go to Zandvoort this year, and I will get to see them race in person and hopefully visit the garage. So I'm excited for Alicia, and I think she's got a strong chance of winning this season. So that was really great. Um, anyway, I enjoyed watching the F1 Academy this weekend. I didn't get to catch a whole lot of F2, but it was just a jam packed weekend. So thank you for joining me. I would love to hear your feedback and your comments. So please comment on your takeaways and what you think is going to happen this season so far. We got a weekend off, and then we'll have Monaco. I know Monaco doesn't always give us great racing. Just doesn't. There's not a lot of ways to overtake on that track. But with these regulation changes, we've not seen Monaco, so we don't know what's going to happen. It's going to be interesting to see, really, I guess, who gets on pole. Can Ferrari figure out a way to make it happen? They might. And therefore, we could have a whole change up. We just don't know. So it could be interesting. And then, you know what? I feel like it shouldn't only be race 5. Now we're on to race 6, but now it's going to come fast and thick. After we have next weekend off, we've got 6 weekends in a row, guys. It's crazy. So it's going to come fast and thick. There's going to be lots of going on, lots to talk about. I'm excited for it. So thank you for joining me. Please subscribe. Continue to join me every week for race recap. And look forward to seeing you for Monaco. Bye.